First, just give us a sense of what it's like right now to be in Cairo under this curfew. Is it quiet? Is it tense? Are people afraid? What are you seeing that the rest of the world is not right now?
Right. Well, Cairo, if your viewers don't know, Jake, is one of the craziest, most intense cities in the world. I mean, it's known for just how huge and intense it is. You know, it's kind of like New York, you know, that kind of big city. So right now it's unnervingly quiet because of the curfew, which is actually very sad. And, I mean, it depends on the neighborhood that you live in. I felt comfortable going downstairs in my neighborhood, kind of, you know, within the confines of the neighborhood. We've been safe, but there've been other neighborhoods that haven't been so safe. So it is a question of people being scared, which again, you know, saddens me deeply, and I'd love to see more people break the curfew out of principle and civil disobedience, because I think that the regime and the military are using that fear to make people willingly give up civil liberties for the sake of this illusion of security. And in the United States, we know very well what that means.
And Mona, as a keen observer of Egyptian politics, what's your take on whether or not Hosni Mubarak, the leader who finally pushed Egypt into this revolution just 2 years ago, what's your take on whether or not he will actually be freed anytime soon?
Right, well, we have to take anything that his attorney says with a grain of salt, because his attorney, Farid al-Dib, pronounced Mubarak on the verge of death many times over the past 2.5 years, and somehow Mubarak, who's in his 80s, miraculously came back to life. So I don't believe anything he says. Now, having said that, I must also stress that our judiciary is corrupt because it was mostly appointed during Mubarak's time, and Mohamed Morsi, who is another ex-president now, even though he seized amazing amounts of power for himself at the end of last year, claiming he was doing so that he could fight the corrupt judiciary and make sure Mubarak was in prison for life, and others who killed revolutionaries, Morsi did nothing about that. So as an Egyptian and as someone from the revolution, I would like to see Mubarak stand trial for the crimes that his regime committed against the Egyptian people, definitely.
What do you think will finally stop at least this round of violence in Egypt? Do you think the protesters will ultimately just dissipate and go back to their lives? Will the military clamp down even further? Where do you see this headed?
Well, I think it's really important, and this was something I said when I was on your show, Jake. When General Sisi overthrew Mohamed Morsi, I think it's very important to separate the two things. I'm glad Morsi's gone because he turned into an authoritarian, and our revolution was never about an Islamist state led by the Muslim Brotherhood, but our revolution was also not about military rule. And I said on July 3rd on your show that if General Sisi, the head of the armed forces, thinks that we will allow a military junta to return, then he's got another thing coming. We want a civilian government. We want to get on with our lives. And the thing that must happen now is that we recognize too many Egyptians have died, and that this binary of military rule versus Muslim Brotherhood makes all of Egypt lose, and that all Egyptians must be included around the table in which all Egyptians reject violence, be it security forces or the Muslim Brotherhood.
And Mona, lastly, obviously in this country, the big debate is what should the U.S. government do? There's some new polling out today from the Pew Research Center. 51% believe that President Obama should cut off aid to Egypt, or the Congress should, the U.S. government should. And then in terms of President Obama's stance towards the Egyptian military, 50% say he's not being tough enough, 6% too tough, 12% about right, 32% don't know. So a plurality at least, or a majority, I suppose, saying that President Obama is not being tough enough with the Egyptian military. What's your position?
Well, I think the United States is confused about Egypt, and it's been confused about Egypt for a very long time, after decades of supporting dictators like Mubarak for the sake of stability and at the expense of the Egyptian people. Now, I would like to see the military aid cut, to be honest with you, because all these billions of dollars are going towards an army that is not at war with anyone, but is using weapons against Egyptians. But I also want to remind your viewers of something really important that rarely comes up in these debates about military aid. The $1.3 billion that goes to the Egyptian army goes towards buying U.S.-made weapons. So it goes right back into the arms manufacturing industry in the U.S. So if you're seeing a reluctance, and if people are saying don't cut military aid on the U.S. side, you have to remember why, because the money goes back towards buying U.S. weapons. So I think the U.S. administration must, as an ally who claims to care about Egypt, call for an end to violence, must not arm anyone who uses those weapons against civilians, especially unarmed civilians, and must say that if you want our continued support, then we call for everyone to sit down and talk. But at the end of the day, it's honestly not important what the outside world does. It's what we as Egyptians do, and we must stop killing each other.
All right, Mona Eltahawy, stay safe as always, and thank you so much for sharing your views. One of the most wanted